Hi everyone, Crypto Scout here. Today I am outside of the Stanford University's Arrillaga Center. It's their alumni center, and I am at the Blockchain Stanford conference. And in just a few minutes, Vitalik Butarin will be speaking about the future of Ethereum. And I, like many people out there, are really curious about what's going on with Ethereum because yes, they have a huge developer base, very healthy community, but we don't see the scaling that we want to see just yet. So let's hear about it. It's probably going to have a lot to do with Casper, hopefully. Let's go hear Vitalik Butarin.
And slots are basically periods of time that are about 6 seconds long. They are grouped into epochs, so 64 slots in an epoch. And during each epoch, every validator makes one signature. So you have every slot, you have a block, and every block gets attested to, so basically signed first by the block proposer, so first by the node that creates the block, and then by this kind of large randomly selected committee of other nodes that basically kind of sign these messages saying, I approve of this block and I think this is the block that is the head of the chain. So this happens every 6 seconds. You get a block comes in, attestations come in, a block comes in, attestations come in, the attestations get included in the chain, and this is kind of how the chain moves forward, right? So these attestations actually have 3 different functions. So one of them is they contribute to the beacon chain fork choice. So a block that is supported by more attestations is the block that people will consider as being part of the correct chain. So we're not using the longest chain rule here, we're using something more complicated, but actually conceptually not too complicated, called LMD Ghost, that I'll talk about right now. It also contributes to finality, so over top of this, there's simultaneously a asynchronously saved consensus algorithm that's running, and in attestations will also, at least in phases 1 and beyond, validate and commit to data on particular shards. Right, so these messages are kind of serving triple duty of kind of short-term agreement, medium-term finalization, and agreeing that data on shards is valid. So LMD Ghost fork choice. So the latest message-driven, greedy heaviest observed subtree fork choice rule is an adaptation of Ghost, which was proposed by Jonathan Sampolinsky and Aviv Zohar in 2013 to a proof-of-stake context. So the idea of Ghost is basically, it's a fork choice rule that says, if you want to figure out which block is the head of the chain, then you start at the beginning, and if there's only one child, you go to the child, but if there's a choice between 2 children, you go to the child that has more messages supporting it. So here, 1 message supporting it, here 4, and then you go up to the next fork, then there's 3 choices, this one has 2, and you go here, and you keep going until you find the head. So Ghost is interesting because it allows us to take in more information, right? It allows us to take in information not just from blocks that arrive in sequence, but also from blocks that arrive in parallel. So for example, if you look at these 3 messages over here, all 3 of these messages are all really also votes for this block over this block, right? And so that's something the longest chain rule, like as a proof of work, does not take into account, right? The longest chain rule basically says this has a score of 4 and this has a score of 1. But really, there aren't 4 votes over here, there are 6 votes. And this is something that, for us, is really necessary because we have a hell of a lot of votes happening every 6 seconds, and we want to take advantage of these votes to kind of give the chain this really robust level of stability. And basically make one confirmation be, the equivalent of 50 confirmations on the existing chain. So this is one vote. Now, LMD Ghost basically says, instead of looking at every message, we look at the latest message that a given client has seen from every validator. Now, this is the fork choice. We can also look at finalization. So Mfg Finalization, basically, this is kind of an adaptation of some classical consensus algorithms that tries to sort of dual-purpose messages that are already being part of a chain-based proof-of-stake algorithm in order to achieve this kind of finality property. And so if the chain is kind of progressing normally, and if enough messages, so like really more than 2/3 of the messages, are agreeing on the same blocks for a span of 2 epochs, then that basically ensures that this block at the beginning of the whole thing gets finalized, And you can prove that unless something like 1/3 of all of the validators are provably acting in some way that's malicious, this block is just never going to get reverted. Right? So this is asynchronously safe and it's crypto-economically safe, and that's not something that you can get either in proof of work or in any chain-based proof of stake system. Crosslinks. So crosslinks are how proof of stake kind of interfaces with sharding. So you have shards, and each shard is also its own chain. And every validator on the beacon chain is also serving as a validator on some shard chain. Now, what we also want to do is we want to kind of commit blocks on the shard chain into the beacon chain for two reasons. One of them is so that finality on the beacon chain can also cause all the blocks on the shard chain to be finalized. Right? If block A on a beacon chain commits to some block on a shard chain and block A gets finalized, then whatever thing on the shard chain it was committing to is also kind of indirectly finalized by proxy. And it also is the kind of base engine by which the different shards can talk to each other. Right? So shards know what the beacon chain state is, the beacon chain knows what the shards are, and so anything that happens on one shard, you can use a Merkle path to prove that it happened to some other shard. So these crosslinks are basically messages that get signed by a committee, which is some randomly selected 128 to 4,096 validators. Now, you might notice that this is relying on a kind of honest majority assumption. So basically this is saying that you have a bunch of validators and we're going to assume that the majority of them are honest, and so the majority of them are only going to sign on any particular crosslink if they actually think that that data is legitimate. Now, it allows a kind of semi-adaptive adversary, but not an extremely adaptive adversary. So what this means is that for each you might notice for each crosslink, or for each shard, the committee that validates that shard is randomly sampled. And pseudo-randomly sampled using some hashes that are created using a special algorithm inside of the blockchain. And what this means is that if an attacker has, say, some smaller, less than 1/3 percentage of all of the validators in the chain, then there is a very small probability that the attacker actually will be selected to have the majority of the messages in any particular committee, and so every committee will be safe. Now, if we had an attacker that was somehow capable of corrupting a specific number of specific nodes after the specific nodes were chosen, then this is not secure against that. But we do have some other defenses against that. So, Pls Signature Aggregation. Now you might ask, well, we have a lot of validators. We potentially have a really lot of validators. The total ETH supply is about 105 million. The amount of ETH you need to become a validator is 32. You can divide 105 million by 32 yourself. That's a heck of a lot of validators that are providing signatures every 6 minutes. How can anyone validate all of this? So Pls Signature Aggregation is this nice cryptographic magic that lets us do this. Basically, these validators are all signing these messages that are about 200 bytes. And every committee is signing on the exact same data, which is really nice. Right? If every committee is signing on the exact same data, it basically means that we can really kind of computationally and data efficiently aggregate these signatures, and all we need is the main message that they're signing, a bit string that represents what subset of the committee is participating, and you can combine all of these signatures into this one signature that can get verified extremely quickly. So the size is for 4,096 signatures is about 608 bytes, and it takes up to about 7 milliseconds to verify. Proofs of custody. So the question that this responds to is, can we do better than an honest majority for crosslinks? So far, from what I've said, the crosslinks are basically saying, well, we have these validators, and these validators are signing onto these blocks of shard chains, and they're only supposed to sign off on these blocks if they think the blocks are honest, and so if all of the validators, or most of the validators, are nice guys, then only correct shard data will actually be included. Can we do better than relying on them being nice guys? And I would argue we actually need to. So there is this somewhat famous paper on the validator's dilemma that was published 2 years ago. But basically the argument is most nodes are lazy and they're not going to validate data if they don't have to. And so what prevents people from switching to the much simpler, dumber strategy of just saying yes on everything? So proofs of custody basically are this mechanism where only if you have the underlying data for some block, you can run a computation on that data, generate a kind of new piece of data, commit to the Merkle root of the new piece of data, and later you have to reveal the secret seed that you used to generate the data, and once you reveal that secret seed, anyone else can, first of all, verify, rerun the computation, verify that you did it correctly, and if you did it incorrectly, they can catch you with a fraud proof, or if you just did not even have the data in the first place and you just made some random commitment, then they can make a challenge that you would not be able to respond to, and in either case, they would cause you to lose a lot of money. So this is a kind of economic defense against a possible lazy majority that should hopefully discourage people from being lazy. So these are some of the basic technologies that we're planning on introducing. There's also some future directions that we're looking at. So there's this work that Mustafa Al-Bassam and I did on data availability proofs via erasure coding. So this is a technology that makes light clients potentially much more powerful. And basically the idea is that if instead of committing to a Merkle root of just regular data, you commit to a Merkle root of data that you erasure coded, that in such a way that, say, any half of the data is needed to recover the original data, then a light client can just randomly sample Merkle branches, and if just from their random sampling they verify that more than half of the data is available, then they know that that data is probably there. And they don't need to actually download the whole thing to verify that enough data is there to recover the thing. So another thing we're looking at is Starks. Starks are useful for a bunch of things. They're useful for compressing Merkle branches. So if a client wants to verify that some block is correct, or that some block, the transactions in some block were correctly executed, they need a lot of Merkle branches to verify that the accounts that the transaction is claiming were modified actually are what the transaction is claiming. And this data is actually something like potentially 10 times bigger than the data in the block. And so if we use a Stark, then we can compress that and we can get maybe another factor of 5 data efficiency. Yay! Verifying correctness of proofs of custody, verifying correctness of data availability proofs. In the really long term, verifying correctness of execution, which would be super nice, so we don't need to bother with things like fraud proofs. Casper CBC, also something that we have not integrated into the Ethereum roadmap yet, but it is something we're very actively looking at. And Casper CBC is nice because it allows us to significantly reduce protocol complexity. It allows the protocol to kind of better survive large portions of validators going offline. And there have recently been improvements that actually make Casper CBC efficient enough that if we wanted to, we can implement it. And it would not cause the node requirements to shoot through the roof if the nodes actually tried to run the thing, which is something that we did not have kind of as strong an idea of before, but we do now. Yay. So these are some of the, just a quick overview of the ideas that are going into the Ethereum sharded system. So it's this combination of a lot of different technologies and ideas that are both kind of separate discrete technologies, but also work together and have a lot of really nice synergies between them. In terms of what you can concretely expect from all of this, I expect the next milestone will be to actually see test nets from some of the client developers. So the Ethereum Foundation has, or the Ethereum community really has this kind of structure that we deliberately tried to foster, where although the Ethereum Foundation and the core research team are taking a lot of effort to kind of spearhead development of the spec and of the protocol, especially in the earlier stages. The development itself is happening by these multiple independent development teams, including, you know, Prismatic Labs, Lighthouse, Nimbus, ChainSafe, and plenty of Pegasus and other wonderful people. And they are like, if at this point, if you want to kind of hear about things like timelines for launch, then you actually don't want to ask me. I know less about that than they do, and you want to ask them. And from what we've asked so far, they're expecting testnets in a couple of months, and so I'm looking forward to actually seeing this go live, as I hope you are. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, maybe I'll ask like, one or two questions, and then we can open it up to the audience.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed that. Please drop me a like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. The Crypto Scout doesn't post every day, but when I do, I post some pretty interesting and exciting information. So please drop me a like. And nonetheless, this is only part 1 of 2. Part 2 is all the Q&A. There's like half an hour of Q&A. So check that out next. Bye.